Welcome to ND and NO, the podcast inspired by our favorite quote, self-advocacy is bullshit. It empowers neurodivergent folks to say no to what doesn't work for them and yes to what does. Brought to you by Umbrella US, the ND23 project, and hosted by Genie V. This podcast is your self-advocacy sidekick. Whether you're a neurodivergent self advocate, a caregiver, an ally, or curious about advocacy in general, this podcast is for you. You get no more, if I can do it, so can you narrative. None of that, if you have money, you deserve care. BS here. Episodes feature captivating conversations, interviews, and expert advice on self advocacy with a focus on community care. We know that self advocacy only works when there is access to the support and care we need. And what does that mean? Without community, self advocacy goes nowhere. Join the movement toward true self advocacy, where we know that without community support, self advocacy is BS. Subscribe now to ND and NO, and let's journey from overwhelmed and undervalued to saying no to what holds us back and yes to what helps us move forward.
Welcome to Indian NO. I'm your host, Genie V. Just for reference, I am a transgender woman. I am wearing a burgundy jacket over a lavender top. I have auburn hair. My background is blurred because right now I'm in the process of transitioning to a new living situation. Today's episode of Indian NO is going to be somewhat challenging. And so we do want to offer, as a courtesy and with compassion, a content warning and potential trigger warning for those who are listening. Today, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity and the correlation that we see with suicidality. There will be frank discussion of the subject of suicide, and we understand that many times this subject can be triggering and problematic. So please understand, we hope that you will enter into this episode with as much self-compassion as you can possibly muster for yourself. I also want to introduce those who are going to join me today in this conversation. AJ Locashio is the executive director and the heart and soul of Umbrella US, and is really the one responsible for putting all of this together and bringing you here. Also, Sarah Phelps is the board of the chair, and will be joining us also in this conversation as we talk about a very sensitive subject.
Hi, Jeannie.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you both. AJ, you want to begin with introducing yourself?
Yes. I am AJ Locashio. I am a genderqueer woman, and I am wearing blue and black glasses. I have black hair with a gray streak in the front, a big gaming headset with rainbow lights and a microphone, and a black cardigan with rainbows on the sleeves.
And Sarah?
Hi, my name is Sarah Phelps. I have curly hair and red glasses and a green t-shirt and a Madonna smile on my face today, unfortunately. So
Thank you both for being a part of this conversation. And there is a purpose behind this. And I do want to offer just a little bit of the background for what has brought us into this. Very recently, someone who has been sort of on the fringes of this organization, sadly, decided that dying by suicide was the easier path for them. And that is not something that we want to take lightly. The loss of anyone is something that needs to be recognized. And so, due to this loss in the Umbrella US organization, we wanted to talk about this subject matter and bring attention to the importance of how being neurodivergent people also has a very visible correlation to the tendency towards suicidal ideation as well as taking one's own life through suicide. So there's a lot to get into this subject. There's a lot to talk about, but AJ, could you help us just very quickly by giving us a brief rundown when we talk about neurodivergence, especially in correlation with this subject? What are we talking about?
When we talk about neurodivergence, a lot of people think that we are talking about 2 or 3 different things. Most people automatically think autism, ADHD. Some others think about dyslexia or Tourette's. Some people may think learning disabilities. However, at Umbrella US, that is not how we define it. We really look at the definition that was given by a biracial individual who was the first person to really use the term neurodivergence. And their name is Cassian Asasumasu. And they really said that neurodivergence is anything in the brain. I'll actually just pop this up here. They say it's a brain that diverges. They said, I am multiply neurodivergent. I'm autistic, epileptic, have PTSD, have cluster headaches, a Chiari malformation. Neurodivergent just means a brain that diverges. They go on to expand that to people with mental illness, people with MS or Parkinson's, apraxia, cerebral palsy, dyspraxia. All of these things are neurodivergence. So that kind of opens up the discussion a little bit, I think, of neurodivergence and suicidality. Oftentimes people don't think about stroke when they think neurodivergence.
Yeah.
They don't think about complex PTSD, which if you're a marginalized individual, you have experienced complex PTSD in various forms. Long COVID, there's not a lot of studies out there, but the studies are showing that there is a neurological impact. Chronic pain, chronic illness, all of these different things are neurodivergent. And we noticed that she mentioned epilepsy. They mentioned MS, cerebral palsy. These are things that a lot of people don't normally think about when they think neurodivergence, if they're thinking about neurodivergence at all. But all of these really are encompassed in this. So anything that has to do with the brain or the nervous system is neurodivergence.
Yeah. Sarah, what does Umbrella US represent in talking about these things? Because there are so many other organizations out there. There are so many things that, so many groups that are trying to focus on one group or another. What does Umbrella US offer that is so different when talking about this subject matter?
Well, it's interesting because we're seeing I would say a rise, especially in women and marginalized individuals, being diagnosed with some type of neurodivergence later in life. Also, a greater understanding of that, what the scope of neurodivergence is. Umbrella US where intention is to fill the gap. A lot of neurodivergence resources, a lot of neurodivergency counseling, all those kinds of things drop off when you go to college, when you hit at the end of high school. And then what do? You're trying to navigate a work life. That is not something any of us are prepared for, much less someone whose entire being is almost like a polarized magnet with other people, where it's very difficult to connect in some cases, or it's difficult to interact on the same wavelength as other people. And you have to put so much tremendous effort into relating and conversing and things like that. Now you are trying to navigate a workplace where you're also supposed to what? Advocate for yourself, ask for a raise, look for a new job. How do you find opportunity when nobody's talking to you? So we are here to fill that gap and help people thrive, because we have to work. Most of us have to work. It'd be great if that's not what was real, but let's make it as accessible for everyone to not have to hate going to work, not have to dread it, not want to hide from the other people at work.
Right.
That's what we're here for.
Awesome. So as we get into the subject of suicidality, when we talk about neurodivergence, that's already something that is not really common in clinical circles, yet. I've talked to a number of therapists who, whenever I mention, neurodivergence and the work that I do, being associated with neurodivergence and self-advocacy, they're like, what do you mean by that? And so that subject in and of itself seems to be not big enough yet to capture a widespread attention. But then we start talking about something as powerful as suicide and the intersection of that. So, this is going to be we don't have time to get in depth with any particular group, but, how do we want to address suicidality when we talk about neurodivergence? I myself represent that branch of neurodivergence that talks about gender dysphoria and dysmorphia and dealing with the marginalized stresses, especially in the US right now and in other places around the world, of being a transgender or gender diverse person, but also being one of those individuals who experiences CPTSD. And so we have this, this is my branch that I talk about. So how do we deal with this? How do we bring this subject up with people to begin to break the silence and hopefully begin to talk about helpful ways of making a difference?
I think the first thing that might be a great idea is to discuss specifically what suicidality is and how it's different than deep depression, how it maybe encompasses suicidal ideation. Do you have some insight for us on the specificity of using the word suicidality?
So, interestingly enough, when we talk about suicidality, we are talking about an entire range of basic ideation that the world would be better off without you, or your family would be better off without you, all the way up through, struggling with, thoughts of despair and, just this ongoing sense of pain, to finally, planning, preparing your social circles and executing the plan. So, it's a wide step. In fact, I've sort of identified, some of the process, some of the factors that go into it. And, it begins with this psychological need that we've talked about, in terms of all of us have psychological needs, whether we use Maslow or any other form of hierarchy of needs. We all have this need for security, belonging, self-esteem, self-identity. And when anything interrupts those, we begin to experience a frustration that manifests itself as psychological pain. It's not just, well, I don't have this thing, I guess we move on to the next thing. There is actually an internal process of pain that we experience. That pain becomes so repetitive in its cycle of ebbing and flowing that eventually hopelessness begins to set in, because there's just no relief. And that's where suicide first comes into play. The idea that nothing is ever going to change, that nothing is ever going to intervene, and that there is no help to be had in this situation. So suicide is now seen as a movement away from pain, not toward death. It is an escape from the hopelessness, not a path into nothingness. It's just the only hope that is left out of an entire world that seems hopeless. And then, people begin to look at it as they continue to experience that psychological pain. They begin to ask the question, do I want to live forever in pain, or do I want to die? And that becomes the question that begins to form the ideation of how they are going to relieve this pain. Death is now, they begin to see death as a shelter. It will stop the pain. It will keep the pain away. But there's also ambivalence, the idea that death is an escape, but people don't want to die. People don't want to end that existence and the few positive connections that they have. And so there are attempts. People will make attempts to discuss this, tell others about the pain that they are in and the depths that they are in, until finally it comes to a place where the plan is put in place, where they will implement that, and it's going to be something that is consistent with how they have handled stress or pain or failure in earlier circumstances. There's consistency. Somebody is going to follow through with the silencing of that pain that has been consistent to what they've known. And I don't want to in any way romanticize this. This is a spiral of darkness that people get into. The pain is so overwhelming. If anyone has ever experienced chronic pain, or you've been around someone who's experienced chronic pain, that psychological pain that we're talking about is as real as any form of physical ailment that produces chronic pain. So this is really a desire to get away from that in the most extreme way possible.
So this is where the conversations that I had we will add information later as information comes in, but we are doing this so soon. We want to be respectful of the family members of this individual by not having names right now. We will add information to this later on as we are given that okay to do so. However, we are doing this because he asked us to. And that's the work that we've been doing with them from the beginning. Every conversation that we have had has been around this. So I don't want anybody to think that we're specifically holding back information right now. We're not. It's just a matter of respect, and that information will be released as we can. With that being said, when we are talking about suicide and suicidality, just that in and of itself becomes a neurodivergency and leads to increased risk of harm to oneself because of the sanist, and that's SANIST, and the stigma that happens around suicide. Anytime you are reading about this, a lot of times people say commit suicide as if it's a crime, rather than say die by suicide. Those two things sound very, very different. In the literature, when you read it, it is people who have suicidal ideation are labeled crazy or insane in a negative way, right? And this is where people listening might say, oh, this is semantics. Semantics do matter. When every message that is coming at you says that you are bad because of these thoughts that you have, or that you are bad because you want what's best for the people who love you, it becomes very difficult. Studies have also been done to show that folks who are prone to suicidality also are prone to having some violent daydreams, because often people picture their own death over and over again. That happens throughout the day. And that then impairs memory. And so now we have this circle happening and this cycle of I'm struggling, I'm in pain, I am causing harm to the people around me because they have to take care of me. They don't want to hear me talk about it. I ask too many questions. They're mad at me because I need help remembering things. All of that is compounded by the messages that folks are getting that suicide and suicidal ideation is bad. It's a sin. These
It's weak.
messages, it's weak, right? How could you ever do that? And then the guilt that is put on people, the shame. And there's an article that was written that specific at the University of Ottawa that specifically talks about this, and they suggest taking an approach to conversations around suicide, the same approach that has been taken for disabled individuals and LGBTQ. They call it the cripping and queering approach to suicidality. And that makes a difference in the care that people get. And today I am saying that we need to consider this, because that is an approach that we are seeing that is working, that is helping people, that having those conversations and the normalization of somebody's brain and what's going on and how they're living their life. Because when we do have suicidal thoughts, we are living our life with that.
Right.
And I think it's a very interesting thing that has not been talked about enough. And in order to get away from the sanism that happens around mental health in general, we could start looking at and talking about suicide through this approach.
I really like that you use the word sanism. I had therapy today, and I was thinking through the idea that you're supposed to go to these mental health professionals and get a cure for your emotions and the way your brain works.
Yeah.
And I feel like right away you've already set an expectation that isn't true. You can only go to therapy to figure out how you are going to navigate it, how you are going to be able to thrive or find joy with it or in spite of it, or however you need to deal with it, because that certainly is going to evolve as you get older, as you have more experiences. I like the idea that we are so biased towards the idea of being balanced and mentally healthy and so very, very sane. But what do we mean by that? I feel like we mean so functional in our society. That's what we mean by sane, almost a facade of health rather than the actual health of it all. I don't know. What do you think about that, Jeannie?
This today's episode, this conversation is hitting me and what you're talking about is hitting me at a very personal level, because I am in an ongoing, state of sort of having to prove my disability with all of the things that I've experienced: CPTSD, anxiety, depression, ADHD, all of these, contributing to my own inabilities to function in a normal, typical world. And I have to prove this over and over and over to say there is something that is a hindrance, because they want me to show improvement. They want me to show the ability to do that. And yet, when I try to do something that shows ability, that's also used against me. And so we're in this cycle of, we want you to be sane unless you're not. Therefore, prove that you're not so that we can give you the assistance that you think you need. And it's like the stigma of being broken is the only one that seems to get attention. And this is when I came out as a transgender woman, that was one of the discussions that was being had at that time. You had to have gender dysphoria to such an extent that you began transitioning. Now, that has since been replaced by a more welcoming and affirming understanding of, gender divergence, and that if you are euphoric when you experience your gender identity, that's the designation. It's not the pain that you experience. It's the joy that you experience. It's the elation that you experience. But this constant need to prove how broken we are is self-defeating.
And it's interesting to me, in my daily life, I'm a LGBTQ educator, and I emphasize very clearly that being transgender is not about being broken. It's about fixing the break. It's about figuring out who you really, truly are and being joyful about that. And I think about neurodivergent folks. Many neurodivergent folks have trouble navigating the nuance of everything.
Mm-hmm.
How do you even get the healthcare you need or the support you need when you can't ask for it, when it is impossible to articulate?
And I think this is where the medical community has really done well in recent years, because we've moved out of localized care into regionalized care. And so things like Plume or other nationwide decentralized medical provision for transgender, gender diversity, or gender diverse care enables people to be able to make those connections. They don't have to go and find an affirming doctor. They don't have to hope that, somebody in an intensely conservative state, they hope that they don't get pushed into conversion therapy. Now we can go to these organizations and we can find this assistance. But more importantly than that, we are now open and out with who we are. And the community has done more to get its community members into places that are good for them. And we still have issues of division, but at the same time, there's enough community care that we can overcome the weaknesses of the medical community.
And in contrast to the ND community, I mean, to AJ's point, when I began to articulate that I am neurodivergent and basically came out as neurodivergent, people looked at me as if I was admitting that I was damaged, as if I am broken. And I'm like, no, I have the same intellectual capacity as I did before. I'm just telling you that there's a word now.
Yeah.
There is no universal or regional care for ND folks because doctors don't know how to. Even my husband went to the doctor. My husband didn't know how to ask for or articulate what was really wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So came back with, a prescription, but never actually talked about what was wrong.
Right.
So I'd love for AJ to talk a little bit about the unique sort of vulnerability of ND folks in a mental health system.
Yeah. It's such an important conversation to have, going back to the definition of neurodivergence. And this, Jeannie, you said conversion therapy. And I was like, that is a great segue into actually what Sarah just asked. Because if we look at this through that same lens of cripping and queering the conversation, if we are talking about queer folks, I use the term queer folks because I am queer and that's the term I use for myself. So let's just say that's LGBTQ, everybody in that. When I say queer, I'm including that for me when I'm having that conversation. When we're talking about queer folks and we start talking about conversion therapy, people are horrified, right?
Mhm.
They're like, I can't believe that that was ever a thing. Obviously, we know that there are people out there who don't act that way. But for the most part, people are like, I can't believe that that was ever normal, that that was what we did. Yet, this is still something that is considered very normal for autistic folks, very
Mhm.
normal for folks who have certain mental health conditions. And it is this idea of we have to stop you from being this way, however hard it is,
Mhm.
whatever pain you have to go through, in order for you to fit in and to make your brain work the way society says it should work, the way our society says it should work.
Yeah.
And that is, it's barbaric, but people look at that as if that is well, yeah, of course, if your brain's not working the way that it should, then we have to do these things. We have to reset your brain.
Yeah.
Even though that has been proven time and time and time again to cause harm and not to work.
Right.
And let me just say as well, I am not saying that one community is more or less than another as far as what they have access to. I'm saying the conversation looks different because neurodivergence is something that is just coming out in conversation. Somebody who I love dearly, they're a dear, dear, dear friend of mine, and they will always be a dear friend of mine, did not understand when I started talking about being neurodivergent. They asked me, why do you want everybody to think you're defective?
Mhm.
That is the message that neurodivergent people are getting
Mhm.
from everybody everywhere,
Yeah.
is that our brain is defective. So you are gifted, defective. You are, you have an intellectual disability that means that you need different supports for different types of reading. Defective. You need extra processing time. Defective. It doesn't matter what you do, you are defective. How do you get around that? When all of the messages that you are getting is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what you change. You as a human being are defective.
Right.
And that's fine that you're that way, but I don't need to hear about it.
Right.
Again, going back to being queer, how many times have I heard this in my life? How many times have I heard in my life, we don't want to know about that? We don't want to
Mm.
hear about that. Well, I have to hear about your significant other. Okay, well, I have to hear about your flu. Why can't you hear about my anxiety?
Yeah.
And it's so isolating. Like, we know
So
that
isolating.
isolation is one of the top 2 factors in actually completing unaliving, if you
Mm-hmm.
want to put it
Yes.
that way. And when you erase someone's identity,
Yes.
that's the ultimate isolation.
Yeah.
Well, and just the condition itself may cause isolation, right? Because let's say that it's a neurological condition that causes physical symptoms as well, and you don't have access to certain things. Now you're not able to participate in meaningful community interactions. And your friends are going, and then they're going to tell you about it, but you don't get to go. Or, um, for me, I'm just going to use myself here for a moment. If I have to go somewhere, just going to the store can be very, very difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
I lived on base. There is a PX there. So just a little, it's a store on base. It's kind of like Walmart, the Marine Corps Exchange. Okay. In order to walk into that store, I had to be completely covered like this because they had perfume. And it didn't matter where I was in the store. It really upset me. It could trigger a migraine. It got me, it took a lot of energy for me to go there, but sometimes I needed to go there. And walking through the store looking like I'm a brat or being childish or, whatever labels people wanted to put on me because I had my sleeve like this, oh, what a, so dramatic.
Right.
It's constantly coming at you, constantly. And then now let's think somebody who has had a stroke. Okay. Let's think they're autistic. They've been dealing with that. They've gotten to a point where they are doing things in their life, they're working, they're doing these, they have a stroke. Now they're even struggling more with some of maybe the hearing, maybe there's some additional auditory processing. And then they go back to some of the therapies that they had when they were younger as an autistic individual. And they're sitting in the occupational therapist's office and they're having to relive some of these memories. I mean, again, it's compounding. The thing
Mm-hmm.
about being neurodivergent, it is one intersection of many.
Mm-hmm.
I am a Black woman who just found out that I'm autistic. I have two kids at home who are neurodivergent, and that's how I found out that I had this. And I just had a stroke because Black women are at a higher risk for stroke and heart disease because of the lack of care that they have. I know I'm just piling these things up, but that is the reality of it.
Right.
And so now we're going, well, when you have all of these things piling up and you're exhausted from it, the only thing keeping this mother alive is her children.
Yeah.
That's a harsh reality right there, but it's a real reality.
And it's one that I've had a number of conversations about over the last couple of weeks with people in my inner circle, because I'm a transgender woman in the United States right now when a genocidal crime wave has been perpetrated. I'm in an ongoing battle with my disability provider to ensure that I have financial security, because without financial security, I don't have home security. I don't have housing. That I am technically homeless, and living under the roof of very grace-filled friends. I have constant anxiety issues. I have constant PTSD issues. And all of a sudden, the subject of my dogs comes up. And I tell people they're the only thing keeping me alive. And if anything threatens that, if anything threatens those dogs, if anything threatens my connection to those dogs, my anxiety goes up and my suicidal ideation goes up, because my existence is tied very closely to them. And that, I have to pay for, I have to pay for shots. I have to pay for licensing. I have to pay for, pet fees. I have to pay for all of these things just to ensure that they get to go with me wherever I go. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at an apartment or something, living in Oklahoma, I can say this, looking at a place to live for $800 a month, and that starts to look suspiciously like another $200 a month for dogs to be in that household. And I'm already worried about the $800 a month. And I don't have, I don't have the ongoing ability to ensure the financial security by going out and getting a job. Because if I get a job, I don't know when I'm going to have a panic attack. I don't know when my PTSD is going to trigger and I'm going to shut down and end up in the floor or the freezer or wherever else is convenient to be inconvenient. So in this case of, there is no separation between my living situation, my support system, and my financial situation. They are all interwoven together, and a threat to one is a threat to me. And I can't separate those.
And for, many individuals in our community are multi-marginalized, just like you.
Yeah.
So how do you find any stability? People talk a lot about, you just need to be more resilient.
Mm-hmm.
You have to stop being traumatized to become resilient.
Yeah.
Resilience is like a callus. It's a reaction to trauma. But if you never stop being traumatized, if you never stop having physical, emotional, intellectual, financial burnout, how are you supposed to also find perspective around suicidal thoughts, find perspective around feelings of worthlessness or hopelessness? You don't have any resources for that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just reading the other day that the Iowa Carver School of Medicine reports that autistic kids with a high IQ are 6 times more likely to think about or commit suicide. There's already a higher rate of suicide among autistic kids. Mm-hmm. Let's extrapolate that out to autistic adults. Let's extrapolate that out to autistic adults who are also transgender and disabled. Maybe they're a person of color. All of those things are piling on you, and you never, ever stop being actively traumatized.
Exactly.
So you're not allowed to talk about it.
Well, you may not even be able to talk about it. Who are you going to talk about it with if they don't want to hear you?
Right.
So, my question is to all of us, what would we need as far as community care, and what do we feel a good community could offer? Because our community member had some support, reached out to a few people, but ultimately decided that this was the best decision for them. I push back against the thought that suicide is an easy decision.
Yes.
Suicide is nearly always something that you do because you want to release other people from your burden, the burden of you. How do we internalize the thought of being able to find community care around it? How do we think communities should offer care around it?
Step one is destigmatizing. We have to stop treating it as an automatic shame that somebody would think about suicide. in in my former life, I had multiple training opportunities for suicide interventions. And, the thought of going back quite some distance was, don't bring up the subject of suicide. And luckily, we are seeing a change in that now. We are now seeing intervention techniques that bring the subject up earlier in the conversation. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Do you have a plan to harm yourself in some way? Those interventions are now in practice in the field. And luckily, we have seen a change because now we can begin to see intervention specialists who can step in and hopefully keep that hard decision from being completed. But we also have to do the work of destigmatizing it in community.
Mhm.
one of the things that I see so often from my past is people who were influenced by Christianity, and specifically a few branches of Christianity that saw suicide as an unpardonable sin, that there was no way to escape the condemnation of that. And I kind of took all of the training that I had on suicide intervention to speak into those communities and saying, look, we can't look at it from the position of it's a sin. We have to look at it as someone is hurting, and coming at that with compassion and understanding, and not being ashamed, not being, in some way guilty of either having those thoughts or having a family member who had those thoughts or having a family member who actually completed suicide. We have to get away from that burden of guilt and shame and the idea that this is some horrible thing that we sweep under the rug. It's not. It is something that we have to talk about. We're having a hard enough time getting the discussion out there about veterans, people returning from combat, PTSD being one of the significant, causal elements that are involved in that. There you go. Neurodiverse experience, but also traumatic brain injuries. Another significant finding in suicidal ideation is traumatic brain injury. And so we see veterans who are barely getting the attention they deserve. We then turn to, marginalized communities, and we watch as, my own community had to grieve one of ours who was 16 years old. And recognizing that those stresses on them pushed them to a place where they wanted away from the pain. So we have to talk about this. We have to be in community with one another and being honest about this. When I sit down with someone who's struggling and they start talking about, I just want to end it, the conversation cannot stop there. The conversation cannot be allowed to drift into awkward and uncomfortable silence. It has to continue with understanding and compassion that what someone is experiencing is so overwhelming that the only hope that they see is this permanent dark end. Letting them know they're not alone, letting them know that their life matters in that moment has to be where community begins to step in.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, even dialing and messaging around, I personally love every neurodivergent person that we come in contact with in our community. I see you all as gifted. I think it's so important to show people that it's not just that it's not at all, in fact, that you lack something. It's that you have the presence of something that is special and different and unique. And in those dark moments, when you feel like you have nothing to offer and you're nothing but a burden, knowing that at least one person in this world sees you as a gift, maybe that's the difference for someone. Maybe, you know?
It might be. For one person that might be, and for another person they might say, "You know what? I don't want to hear the positive messages today. I want to know that
Yeah.
yeah, I want to know that it's okay. That these thoughts that I'm having, they're not negative thoughts, they're just thoughts. Because negative equals bad, positive equals good. Well, to me, that positive thing, maybe that doesn't equal good right now. It doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't help me. And sometimes we have to have that conversation with somebody of, when you're feeling this way, how do you want this conversation to go? Do you want a pep talk? Do you want to sit together? And do you want to just say the truth of what you're feeling? And it depends on the person. Every single thing, every interaction you ever have with somebody will be context dependent. And everything should be consensual, which means you have to negotiate what the conversation is going to look like. And because of the stigma, we don't do that. Not to mention our serious lack of communication skills. People are, tell me that I have communication problems. And of course, what did I do? I went to therapy to get it fixed and and I'm glad I learned a lot of things. But ultimately, I'm like, really? I don't find that a lot of us have major communication problems. I find that we have communication problems within a system that doesn't want to hear the truth, that doesn't want to talk about the hard things, or where it's not PC to talk about something. There's so many taboos, and how can you even keep up with them? But I think that there is some proof. You know me, I'm always going to go to the research. I'm going to be that person that says, well, actually, the research says. I found this study from Denmark. Now, let's just talk about this. They are more progressive than us in a lot of ways. So I can see somebody taking this and saying, oh, well, that's not in the US. Why are you? Because this is somebody who is doing better in a lot of areas than the US. And they have these massive numbers. And what really excited me about this research, and yes, excited me about this research, is that we're talking about an association between neurological disorders and death by suicide. And when we look at neurological disorders, here are some of the ones that they give: head injury, stroke, epilepsy, polyneuropathy, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, central nervous system infections, meningitis, encephalitis, ALS, Huntington's, dementia, intellectual disability, and other brain diseases. This right here is research that was done that looks at neurological conditions. And I think it is exciting to see that they were doing this, but something more was this was done over cohorts between 1980 through 2016. And when they looked at death by suicide, the suicide incidence rate for people with neurological disorders decreased from 78.6 per 100,000 persons during 1980 to 1999. Okay, so that's 78.6. Okay. to 27.3 in the years 2000 to 2016. When we look at some things that were happening there, people were having conversations and more able to talk about disability, more able to talk about these things. Organizations were being, coming together to provide community support for people. We can see right there that community support helps.
Mm-hmm.
We can see that. It's right here in these numbers. And now it's time for us to go even further and say, okay, first of all, these numbers are still tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
They're still higher, much, much, much higher. Here's another one for you from the American Heart Association. Someone who has had a stroke is 73% higher risk for suicidality. They are twice as likely to attempt suicide, and they are at 63% higher risk of dying by suicide. That diminishes over time, which tells us again something is happening. Either they perceive themselves as fixed, right? So they start getting better and more able to work in the environment that is there, or they're getting some supports that they need. But this is something that is diminishing over time. We need to be having these conversations immediately.
Yeah.
If I go into the hospital for a stroke today, I need to be having conversations about my mental health along with that, including suicide today, not once I start presenting with symptoms.
Yeah.
Or, God forbid, when you finally start talking about them. By that
Right.
point, you've already created a neural pathway around it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I
Absolutely.
mean, those statistics should kind of be branded in our minds, right?
And
Yeah.
you mentioned the
63%.
you mentioned the neural pathway. Researchers from Boston University and the VA Boston healthcare system found that there are actual brain structure differences
Yes.
for people who have thought about or attempted suicide.
Absolutely.
So now we are looking at the reality that not only is neurodivergence a correlation for suicide, suicidality is in and of itself possibly its own neurodivergence.
Yes.
And that's a conversation that we have to keep at the forefront, because what it says is that there are some people who the wiring that they possess has been altered for whatever reason.
Yes.
And we have to talk. They don't just get over that. I don't just get over the trauma of my past and, oh, I'm all fixed. I don't just get over being transgender. I don't just get over being ethically non-monogamous. I don't get over these things. They are a part of my wiring. And
Nor do you get over the reactions that people have when they learn these things about you.
Right. And so we have to start taking that conversation, taking control of that conversation and saying, you don't just tell someone who's experienced suicidal ideation, who's attempted suicide, you don't just look at them and say, it'll get better, because that's not the path of reality.
Yes.
And I will just rejoinder and say, I wasn't trying to be all Pollyanna and rose-colored glasses before. I'm saying we need to reframe the whole conversation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Around neurodivergence, around marginalization in general, but neurodivergence. Yeah. We can't keep talking about it as a lack of. No more.
No more.
We lack nothing at all.
Yep.
But to your point also, Jeannie, you can actually get online and look at a picture of someone's brain when they are having suicidal thoughts. They have taken a picture of it. Oh. And it is like watching a black cloud with fireworks in it, because the suicidalness, the depression causes things to stop working. And then you can watch the highways of suicidal thoughts moving through that black cloud like lightning.
Mm.
And that is an image that is indelible to me.
Yeah.
Because, it feels completely violent and violating, that I don't know if I can articulate a thought correctly around it, but I think about that, that's going on in your brain, and you're trying to smile at the cashier at the grocery checkout.
Yeah.
How strong are people?
Right.
How strong are you when you are at that checkout and you're managing something, some kind of interaction, but inside your brain, there's a thunderstorm. It has never been weakness.
How strong are you forced to be? Right? This is another one of those things, right? That we keep hearing is, yeah, I'm strong because I have to be.
Right.
I don't
That's
have any
what
other
resilience
choice.
is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, and we look at resilience as the ability to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, whatever that means. It's not. It's not. Resilience to me, if we look at, oh gosh, I'm going to try not to get too into this. I'll get into this just a little bit. Y'all pull me back if you need to, please. If we look at ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, and we look at PCEs, which are positive childhood experiences, we can see that someone can have a score of 10 on ACEs, so 10 out of 10 on the little mini scoring there. Just for reference, a score of 4 substantially decreases your life expectancy. Okay, so it goes up exponentially at 4. It goes up a little at 2, a little at 3, and exponentially at 4. Your life expectancy is decreased with each of those numbers. Now, somebody who has that and they have no positive childhood experiences, and don't tell me that doesn't happen, because it does, their scores remain what they are. However, somebody who has positive childhood experiences, their data looks like somebody who has less. And that is because of resilience. Not because this person has intentionally gone, I'm going to be strong, but because they had community. And when we look at what those positive childhood experiences are, we can clearly see that it is having adults in a child's life that take them to community events. Therefore, meaningful, right? Meaningful. I just completely lost the word. What is it when you participate in something? Participation?
Interactions?
Yes. Meaningful interactions in the community. We'll just leave it at that. It's okay that I forgot that word. Meaningful community interactions and engagements. That's what I was looking for to say. Those are positive, and it can happen as adults too. So we got to stop saying, oh, well, this happened in their childhood and it's over and done with. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. We can have positive community experiences as adults, but only if we provide access to those as a community without somebody having to ask for it.
Yes. Yeah. Resilience isn't character. Resilience is community.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Can we have that on a shirt, please?
It's so funny, the things that we equate to character, right?
Yes.
Things that we have. If you're weak, you have no character. If you're gay, you have no character. If you don't make a lot of money, you have no character. If you're not resilient, you have no character. None of that is true.
Right.
None of it.
I'm gay. I have lots of character, baby.
And you are a character, in fact.
I am a character. And I have had in the past, it's been a very long time for me, and I really do say that this is because of community and because I've been very vocal about it. I have had suicidal ideation. There have been times when I thought the world would be better if it didn't have to deal with me.
Yeah.
But then I go to a concert or I play D&D. I mean, that's really been my life. What has really saved me time and time again is the geek community. A whole bunch of indie folks getting together and doing all kinds of cool, fun stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not doesn't even have to be a lot of people. In fact, if it's a lot of people, that's overwhelming.
Yeah.
But having these folks understand, Sarah, I'm going to use, actually, both of you have said this about me, that I can be very, very, very childlike. And being allowed to spin in circles or cry or laugh because I'm petting baby goats or like this and jump up and down because I'm so excited to see you and I haven't seen you in a year, being allowed to do that and accepted in that is life saving. That's what we need more of.
Yeah.
Resilience comes from that. Not me intentionally doing some self-help bullshit by myself. It doesn't work.
And then that gets back to the depathologization of, whether we're talking about gender dysphoria or we're talking about autism spectrum or we're talking about, any of these other things that have been pathologized and told your suffering is what makes you. Well, no. Suffering has happened. What makes us is the discovery of life beyond that. And, that's what we're talking about here. We don't try to build resiliency by seeing how much more pain we can suffer. There are some people who do that. They enjoy submitting themselves to more suffering in order to try to find resilience. But resilience is not built in the suffering. Resilience is built in the recovery. It's built in that being able to settle back into some kind of comfort, to settle back into some kind of, recognition that life is still moving forward. We don't have to suffer in order to live through life. There is a return to some sense of normalcy. Now, for those people who are in chronic stress, who are in chronic trauma situations, that resiliency is happening as suffering continues, as that goes on. It's that it's the moving of the goal line. How much can you take? Well, I don't know. Let's find out what tomorrow holds. People used to ask me, it's like, can you do this? And I'm like, I can do anything for another. And I started out by saying I could do anything for another year. And then it was like, I can do anything for another month. And then it was, I could do anything for maybe the next week. And then it finally got to the point where I was like, this is stupid. I can't do this. And that awareness was me saying, I don't have to suffer. I don't have to put up with this for another month. I don't have to put up with this for another year. I can take control of my circumstances in some situations, and now I can have the life I want. Which is why Genie V exists today, is because there were a lot of people telling me that the other guy had to keep going. Had to keep going for my wife, had to keep going for the United Methodist Church, had to keep going for my mother, had to keep going for my sister, had to keep going for my kids. And the other guy was giving up. The other guy was running out of stuff, and he was running out of I can do this for another month, or I can do this for another year. And I finally said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to be who I want to be. And that's where I was born, was in that deciding that my joy, my life was a lot more important than someone else's need for me to continue suffering.
So let's build those systems for neurodivergent folks.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's very facile to say not one more, no more of this. But the reality is that we don't have systems that support the not one more philosophy.
Exactly.
And
Right.
if our systems can't do it, we'll build a system around it.
Absolutely.
The
Absolutely.
three of us, our extended community, everything we've got
Yep.
should be around, at the very least, maintaining your life,
Yes.
maintaining your ability to choose differently, if that's what you want.
And to find belonging. To find belonging. This is the key. And unfortunately, our community member did have supports in place and also was hearing from many organizations, you're out, you're out, you're out. We can't deal with you. You communicate, you're too harsh, you're abrupt, and I admit it was difficult having conversations sometimes. It was very difficult. But why was it difficult? Was it difficult because it wasn't fitting in with the way that I wanted to communicate? Was it difficult because we hadn't interacted enough to figure out what our rhythm was? There are a lot of reasons for difficulty. But when you have a member of the community and you decide that that person no longer gets to be a member of the community, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we do. We see it all the time. We see it all the time. And again, we're going to talk about different marginalizations. The transgender community can be very accepting of being transgender, but if you have a trans member who is not accepting of any other intersection, then that person is now cast out of a community that they had belonging to, that they have the right to belong to, and now they're cast out of that community.
Right.
Right? And then maybe the disability community, this person's a member of the disability community, and now they cast that person out because their disability causes a hardship for communication.
Right.
And I feel like I'm getting very angry here, but this is what happened. This is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the more marginalized identities you hold in yourself, the more you feel like I can't be enough of any of them. I don't belong in those communities because I'm not enough of that. I'm not enough of a transgender person, a disabled person, a neurodivergent person, a this, a that.
Yes.
Now what?
Yeah.
Now what?
And this gets to that place of gatekeeping that is endemic in almost any form of community. I use TikTok as my primary social media and activist platform. And sometimes I don't go to the effort of putting on makeup, putting on hair. And so, I look, when I'm natural, I do not look anything like this. And that's just the reality of it. I will be sitting there on TikTok, engaging with my community, talking with the people who know and appreciate me and the work that I do. And invariably, someone who identifies as transgender will tell me how invalid I am and how much embarrassment I am bringing to the transgender community because I am confusing the cis folk. And it's like, well, first of all, I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you my presentation. I don't owe you my transition. I don't owe you my medication. But technically speaking, scientifically speaking, medically speaking, I am a transsexual person because I have been transitioning. You can't tell that because you're more interested in the outward appearance than in getting to know me as a person. And as long as people continue to say that, as long as people say, I'm not interested in knowing you as a person, they are going to find a way to justify gatekeeping and excluding and keeping others out.
And I'll also say, from an organizational standpoint, you have to give people room to have the emotional capacity to get to know other people.
Mm-hmm.
If you are so focused on capitalism and production and human capital, which makes me sick to my stomach that people even use that phrase anymore, how are you creating room for teams to form, for a team member to even notice someone else is going through trauma and maybe has pulled back and has started to regress into themselves? Like, you've got to create emotional space in your organization to be able to enable people to have healthful lives, to connect healthfully. If all you're thinking is production, you are killing people.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop.
Yes.
Yeah, if if the bottom line is your top margin, then you don't have anywhere to go.
Absolutely. Why are we building in flexible places for flexible people?
Yeah.
Why?
Mm-hmm.
Every place should be able to embrace a Genie, an AJ, a Sarah. Every place should have that capacity. We got to find connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a tendency to quip and make short little comments that other people are suddenly like, wow, damn, that was profound. And I said something last week that still has haunted me. And that is, the sad reality of being people is that humanity is not a requirement. And right now we're in a surge of people who want to exclude humanity from their decision-making process. They don't want to be humane in how they treat others. They don't want to understand people who are different. They want to be a people unto themselves, and anyone who does not fit in with their program and their standards must be excluded, even sometimes to an extreme.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, look how much we want our own trauma or our own experience to be primary.
Mm-hmm.
And that excludes other people.
Yeah.
It excludes other people. Slightly off topic, but we are moving out of that zeitgeist.
Mm-hmm.
The postmodern individualism is in its last death throes, and we're moving towards a more community-oriented model, but that could take 50 to 100 years.
Yep.
Right.
So how do we ameliorate the damage in the meantime? Because we are losing bright minds, great people, fabulous hearts.
Yes.
Every individual is equally worthy and deserves to be here and deserves to be loved. And how do we create systems around that?
Well, now this is my own personal, campaign, but it's moving away from nuclear community into clan community. The idea that you have just the necessities of a partner who is equal and supportive, and maybe a couple of ancillary individuals who draw strength from you. We got to get away from the nuclear structure, because we've already seen that's a failed experiment, and move back to the clan structure. The idea that we as a clan hold one another together. We hold each other in that space of everyone has a place here. And when somebody is falling short, it's not a matter of, cutting them off, but instead it's a matter of the clan surrounding them and bringing them up.
You know what? You're absolutely right. Think about the disconnect of how we think we're running teams, where we build for strengths to, match other people's gaps and things, but we don't do that in the community, do we?
Nope.
We don't flow to fill the empty spot.
No.
Right,
Instead, we cut off the empty.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We try to we try to stick in a place of balance. We try to find balance and hold that there when, of course, that's not possible, rather than becoming harmonious, flexible, fluid. Um, all of those things are looked down upon,
Yeah.
right? When we think about those words, fluid. Nope, nope, that's bad.
Right.
People don't look at that as something that is that is a strength, that is a need, that is a necessity. And I think that we need to definitely start looking at that and trying to be harmonious as a community instead of be a balanced people.
Yeah.
You just articulated the very point of the difference between equality and equity.
Yes.
Mhm.
Equality is static, same exact thing for the same people. Equity is ebbing and flowing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody needs and wants and has different things to offer at different times.
Yes.
Right.
That's what you're talking about. Equity, community.
Yeah. Absolutely 100%. And um I honestly am not sure which one of you um said the said what made me think about this, but in the article that I was talking about of the where they were talking about cripping and queering the conversation, um, they go even further in depth. And here's the harsh truth: acceptance. That's what one of
Mhm.
you was talking about. Acceptance. Acceptance is where harmony comes in. And this, they said, suicide affirmative healthcare, an ethics of living with suicidal people. So again, we're having this conversation of it is normal to have these thoughts.
Mhm.
We're normalizing having conversation around this. Um, I'm going to read this line because I just found it fascinating. Attempting to destigmatize suicide and to recognize it as one viable option among others, albeit one that requires considerable critical reflection with the support of relatives, friends, and healthcare professionals. I'm adding in haha community, right? That's what they're saying with community support, may help a majority of suicidal people find solutions other than suicide along their exploratory journey of life and death. That is the most profound thing I have, and comforting.
Yeah.
When I read that, I felt very comforted as a person who has thought this myself, as a person who has lost many people who I love. This, I'm like, yeah. What if we had that conversation and said, okay, that's an option.
Yeah.
What are all of the options?
Right.
Not again, not from a, let's only look at the positive. No, let's look at everything holistically, realistically, logically, the way your brain is working right now.
Yeah. And
Let's acknowledge and accept it.
also on a non-binary pole orientation.
Yes.
There
Yes.
is no suffering and death are the only options. It is not a binary pole
Right.
position. It really is a spectrum of different ways. And when we bring community in, community actually forms a new pole. So it is no longer a binary pole decision. With community, it opens up so many more options. And if we could harness that imagery of saying, community is the ultimate in non-binary decision making, that would free us to be able to have these conversations on a much more in-depth and personal level.
The word that comes to mind hearing you say that is healthy.
Mm.
We don't even treat our bodies that way.
Right.
So, the thought of being able to do that in community,
Yeah.
I mean, how healthy.
Right.
Well, now, so challenge on that, because sometimes the communities that we have do not have a healthy understanding of healthy.
Right.
For example, if we're talking about people who experience addiction, the communities that they have are not necessarily healthy, because the communities that they have are going to, reinforce
Yep.
the addiction. And there's a change of community that is necessary to be able to bring a different result to that. So, and I think we experience that in many different areas of ND differences.
Mhm.
And we get caught in the people we're comfortable with, and even though the system that we're a part of is not healthy, we in the midst of it have a homeostasis that feels healthy because it's our norm. And so being able to break out of the models of systems that we exist in and say we want a healthy system, and it's going to feel unhealthy for a while until we make that transition and we're a part of something that helps us be a healthier person. I think that's a part of the work that we do.
And we have to take sanism into consideration when we're defining healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Right.
oftentimes when they think healthy, they think non-disabled,
Mm-hmm.
physically, mentally, but that's not true.
No.
Right? You can be very healthy. I am a disabled individual and I am healthy.
And similarly, you can't see my whole body, but I'm a pretty fat person, and ironically, pretty healthy as well. It's stress that's causing issues, not the other, the weight of my body. So I do think that for me, healthy just means that you have the ability to make unburdened choices that feel good and are good for you.
Right.
Um, because I'm trying to remove the idea of judgment. I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to remove the idea that one way is healthy and one isn't, because as you said, binary thinking is so limiting. It's so static. You will break yourself against the binary because
Mm-hmm.
nobody fits a pole.
No.
No
Right.
one in any aspect of your life do you sit on the pole, no matter how much you think you do, and you're going to break yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, honestly, if you sit on a pole, you just got a rod up your ass. We'll edit
Well,
that one out in post.
that's it in a nutshell.
I mean, but it's true. And you know what? We might not edit that out because editing that out says it's not okay to have a sense of humor when we're talking about something that's so serious.
Right.
But honestly, it is. It absolutely is. We were all thinking it. Jeannie said it, and it is okay to laugh. We needed that. We've been talking for an hour and a half and having a very serious conversation, and I'm going to say that laughing, cracking a joke, no, I'm normalizing that shit.
Absolutely. Let's let our inner 13-year-old boys out.
Right?
Excuse me, I
Right?
did that. I
Hey,
found them to be lacking.
um, absolutely. Jeannie, you always do that to me where I can't say the next thing. Um, I want to have more conversations like this. One thing I would like to note about this is we are three white women albeit white women with different experiences, but we are three white women having this conversation, and there is a lot more to this conversation from other people and their experiences. I would like to continue the conversation. Anybody who is listening or watching, if you would like to join in the conversation, if you know somebody who would be great at having this conversation, please let us know so that this can be something we continue. We are not going to do this one time as a performative act. We are going to continue this, inviting people in to normalize the hard things.
Right.
I'll just say that the community that the three of us built during this call has been really profound for me. And I want to thank you both for your presence here.
Thank you for that opportunity.
I just love you both.
Ditto.
Well, you're to blame for all this. So.
It's okay. I will accept that blame. I will accept that blame. There are resources available. Please do not make a decision for us of whether we have the time to talk to you or not. Let us know if you want to talk. If you are looking for support, we may not have that directly, but we have resources that we can look at, and sometimes our ability to provide those may help in an instance when you're not quite able to think about all of the different areas where you could go and search it out. So we have that available at umbrellaus.org, as well as a contact form to reach out there, which includes my email address so that you can reach out to have those conversations, or ask for support. If we don't have it, we will find it. And get it put onto the page. If you have a resource that is great, please let us know that as well so that we can add that for others who might come and visit.
So thank you to everyone who listened to our amazing call today. And I'm saying amazing because I feel like it needed to be said. And that's what amazement is something that surprises you with its depth and its intensity. Genie is hosting this podcast on a regular basis. So come back and listen to the wisdom that you're going to get from it. I would also say your experience is valid. If you are on this call, if you are listening to a taped recording, everything that you think and feel is absolutely valid. Absolutely valid. And you are welcome in our community.
Belonging starts here.
Absolutely.
Very much. Any other closing thoughts?
I'm ready to take us out if you're ready to head out.
All right, let's do it. Take us
All
out,
right.
AJ.
Thanks for listening to ND and NO, a neurodiversity podcast for self-advocates and allies, a monthly live panel discussion coming to you every fourth Thursday at 11:30 a.m. U.S. Central Time. If you or someone you know would like to be on the pod, be sure to let us know by filling out the Share Your Experience form at umbrellaus.org. If you're catching this live on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel for updates on this and other Umbrella US events. And finally, if you'd like to support the podcast, be sure to leave a rating and review and share with your friends. To donate to Umbrella US and learn all the latest from us, visit us at umbrellaus.org and on all of the social media platforms at umbrellaus.org. Thanks again. See you next time.